There's a river on the Mississippi Gulf Coast that doesn't draw much attention. The Pascagoula runs past shipyards and marshland before emptying into the Gulf of Mexico, a slow stretch of dark water bordered by reeds, decaying docks, and hanging Spanish moss. At night, it feels cut off from the rest of the world. The air is thick, sound carries strangely, and once the sun goes down, the river turns into a long black mirror that gives nothing back. October evenings here are usually quiet. You hear insects, the faint clatter of machinery from the yards, maybe the distant splash of something moving in the water. It's the kind of place people go when they want to be left alone, when they want the noise of the day to fall away. On one such night in 1973, two men stood on a small wooden pier, lit by a single lantern. Behind them was the shipyard. Ahead of them was the river, stretching into darkness. Nothing about the evening seemed unusual at first. No warning, no sense that anything was wrong. Then a sound cut through the stillness. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, just unfamiliar. The air felt different. The water reflected a faint, cold glow where there shouldn't have been any light at all. And in that moment, whatever calm the night had offered disappeared. What followed would stay with those men for the rest of their lives. It would leave behind police reports, taped interviews, and decades of argument. And it would turn one quiet stretch of river into the center of one of the most unsettling encounters ever reported in the American South. Even now, the Pascagoula doesn't give up answers easily. It just keeps flowing. To understand how extraordinary the events on the Pascagoula River were, we must start with the men involved in the time in which they lived. Charles Hickson was 42, a shipyard foreman who had fought in the Korean War. Calvin Parker, just 19, was newly engaged to Hickson's daughter and had recently begun working under him at Ingalls Shipbuilding. On Thursday, the 11th of October, 1973, after a long shift welding steel for Navy vessels, the two men decided to go fishing to unwind. They drove down Highway 90, turned off onto an old road, and parked near an isolated pier on the west bank of the Pascagoula River. At that time, the American South was in the grip of what newspapers called the UFO flap. Reports of strange lights and unexplained objects were cropping up across Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. Neither Hickson nor Parker paid much attention to these stories. Their concerns were paying bills and supporting their families. The pier they chose was familiar territory, a quiet spot away from town where shipyard workers often went to fish for mullet and catfish. They brought fishing rods, a small cooler, and a lantern. As dusk settled, the river's dark surface reflected the faint glow of refineries downstream and the stars above. The two men settled in, unaware that within the next hour, they would experience something that would change the course of their lives. Just after 9 o'clock, a strange buzzing noise cut through the night. At first, Hickson assumed it might be an outboard motor on a passing boat, but the sound grew louder and took on an electric quality he couldn't place. A pulsing blue light illuminated the reeds and the muddy bank. Calvin looked up and saw an object descending toward them. An oval craft roughly 30 to 40 feet across and about 8 to 10 feet high, hovering silently a few feet above the water. Its surface was smooth and metallic, with no visible windows or seams, and lights glowed along its edge. A hatch opened and 3 beings emerged. According to the men, these figures stood around 6 feet tall, with wrinkled gray skin that looked more like rubber than flesh. Their heads were shaped like bullets, tapering to points, and their faces were featureless except for small slit-like eyes. Instead of hands, each arm ended in a crab-like pincer. The creatures did not walk. They floated, gliding across the air toward the fishermen. Before Hickson or Parker could react, they felt an invisible force lift them off the pier. They were drawn into the craft through the hatch and into a chamber bathed in bluish light. Inside, Hickson said he could not move or speak. Parker, overwhelmed by fear, fainted. A fourth object that resembled a mechanical eye floated into view and began to scan Hickson's body from head to toe. He described the sensation as a warm vibration, not painful, but deeply unsettling. After several minutes, the beings returned, guided the men back out of the craft, and deposited them on the riverbank. The hatch closed, the craft rose into the air and shot off across the river, disappearing in seconds. Hickson and Parker were left trembling, disoriented, and unsure if anyone would believe what had just happened. Initially, the men decided not to tell anyone. They feared ridicule, and Parker wanted to go straight home. Hickson convinced him that such a strange event needed to be reported, so they drove into town and stopped first at the offices of the local newspaper. Finding no one there, they headed to the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. It was around 11 p.m. when they told their story to Captain Glenn Ryder. He listened with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. To test whether they were hoaxing, Ryder left them alone in an interview room with a hidden tape recorder running. If they were lying, he expected them to whisper and laugh about fooling the authorities. Instead, the recording captured the two men whispering fearfully, wondering if those things would come back and what they should do. The next day, the story hit local newspapers and quickly went national. The men were taken to Keesler Air Force Base for medical examinations, including checks for radiation exposure. They were found physically unharmed and released. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer and former consultant to Project Blue Book, which was the U.S. Air Force's official systematic investigation into unidentified flying objects from 1952 to 1969, traveled to Pascagoula with researcher James Harder to interview Hickson and Parker under hypnosis. Both men recounted similar details separately, and Hynek later told reporters he believed they had undergone a genuinely frightening experience. Hickson agreed to take a polygraph test, which indicated he believed he was telling the truth. As media interest grew, Hickson began appearing on talk shows and speaking at UFO conferences. He wrote a book and continued to insist that what he had seen was real. Parker, by contrast, retreated from the spotlight for decades, only speaking publicly much later. Residents of Pascagoula were divided. Some mocked the men as drunks or hoaxers, while others believed they had encountered something beyond human understanding. In 2019, the city erected a historical marker near the alleged site of the abduction, and Parker published a memoir. Decades on, the Pascagoula abduction remains one of the most discussed and debated encounters in UFO history. Proponents of the Pascagoula abduction offer several lines of evidence to support the claim that Hickson and Parker's encounter was genuine. They point to the detailed testimony of the witnesses, the corroborating secret recording, and the involvement of respected researchers. Below, we examine the main arguments. Believers argue that the description of the craft and its occupants defies any conventional explanation. Hickson and Parker described an oval, bus-sized object hovering silently with a smooth metallic surface, something no known aircraft could achieve in 1973. The beings they encountered were unlike any creatures in folklore or fiction at the time. Tall, gray, robotic, and equipped with pincers instead of hands. Supporters note that such details surfaced before these features became tropes in science fiction. Another piece of supporting evidence is the tape recording made at the sheriff's office. When Captain Ryder left the men alone, he expected them to reveal a trick. Instead, the recording captures their continued fear and confusion. They speak softly about what to do if those things return and worry about not being believed. This unguarded conversation, believers say, demonstrates their sincerity. Additionally, Hickson's past polygraph test is cited as further proof that he believed his own account. Polygraphs are not foolproof, but within the UFO community, they are often seen as supporting evidence. Believers also point to the endorsement of J. Allen Hynek. Hynek had spent years debunking UFO sightings for the Air Force before becoming convinced that some cases represented genuine unknowns. After interviewing Hickson and Parker, he stated that there was no question the men had experienced something traumatic and unexplained. For believers, the combination of consistent eyewitness testimony, spontaneous emotional reactions, and support from a respected scientist makes the Pascagoula Abduction one of the most credible alien contact cases. Another faction of believers contends that Hickson and Parker were taken not by extraterrestrials, but by a secret military project. Pascagoula is home to a major naval shipyard, and Keesler Air Force Base is a short drive away. Supporters of this theory note that the oval craft could have been a prototype drone or a classified hovercraft. The robotic beings might have been operators in experimental suits or remotely controlled devices used to conduct physiological tests. The floating eye that scanned Hickson could have been advanced medical technology. Proponents argue that the men were brought to Keesler Air Force Base for more than just a medical check. They suggest the base's doctors may have been involved in the program and used the opportunity to debrief the men. The lack of a formal government investigation into an alleged alien kidnapping is interpreted as a cover-up. Instead of addressing the possibility of human experimentation gone awry, authorities allowed the story to be framed as an alien encounter, thereby diverting attention. Comparisons are made to other secret programs like Project Mogul and MK Ultra, in which civilians were unwittingly used in experiments and the truth withheld for decades. Supporters of this theory point out that similar incidents have occurred near military installations. The 1980 Rendlesham Forest case in England involved U.S. Air Force personnel witnessing a strange craft on the grounds of RAF Woodbridge, which many believe was a test of classified technology. By grouping Pascagoula with such cases, proponents argue that the U.S. military may have staged or mishandled an experiment that night, and subsequently allowed UFO lore to obscure the truth. A third believer claim focuses on the broader pattern of alleged abductions involving robotic or mechanical beings. Researchers who catalog encounters note that most stories feature small gray humanoids with large eyes, but a subset describes taller figures with mechanical features. Hickson's description of 6-foot-tall beings with conical heads and pincers fits within this subset. Supporters connect the Pascagoula case to earlier reports, such as the 1957 Antonio Vilas Boas incident in Brazil, where the abductee described beings in bulky suits that made mechanical noises, and to later cases like the 2001 Villa Urquiza abduction in Argentina, where the witness claimed robotic entities examined him. Believers argue that these similarities hint at a specific class of visitors. The robotic nature of the beings could suggest they are probes sent to interact with humans on behalf of an advanced civilization. Such probes would be durable, emotionless, and able to carry out experiments efficiently. Hickson later reported that he continued to have telepathic contact with the beings, receiving visions of catastrophic floods and other messages. For supporters, this indicates that the encounter was part of an ongoing program, and that Pascagoula was not an isolated incident, but one node in a global pattern of robotic abductions. Together, these claims build a case that something extraordinary happened on the Pascagoula River. Whether seen as genuine contact with an alien species, evidence of a covert military project, or part of a pattern of robotic visitations, the believer's perspective relies on the men's testimony, corroborating recordings and parallels to other encounters. Skeptics have scrutinized the Pascagoula abduction for decades, offering alternative explanations for the events Hickson and Parker described. In this chapter, we present the main counterarguments, each responding directly to the believer claims outlined. One of the most common skeptical positions is that the encounter was fabricated for attention or money. After the story broke, Hickson and Parker sold exclusive rights to the National Enquirer and received payment for their account. Hickson embraced public appearances, wrote a book, and traveled to UFO conventions, earning speaker fees along the way. Skeptics argue that these financial incentives, combined with the allure of fame, could have motivated the men to concoct a dramatic story. They also note that polygraph tests, often cited as evidence, are not reliable indicators of truthfulness and can be manipulated. Additionally, skeptics point to inconsistencies in the men's statements. Hickson claimed subsequent contacts and prophetic visions, while Parker remained silent for decades and only later spoke about ongoing experiences. Some of the men's co-workers reportedly recalled them discussing UFOs and joking about creating a story before the incident. Though these accounts are anecdotal, they fuel suspicion. Critics also highlight the cultural climate of the early 1970s, when films and TV specials featuring abduction stories, such as dramatizations of the Betty and Barney Hill case, were popular. They proposed that Hickson and Parker drew inspiration from these narratives and tailored their story to fit familiar motifs. A second line of skepticism contends that the men misinterpreted ordinary stimuli during a period of heightened stress and fatigue. The whirring noise and flashing lights could have originated from nearby industrial equipment or passing vehicles. The oval craft might have been the underside of a crane or barge illuminated by floodlights. Calvin Parker fainted during the event, and Hickson admitted to having a drink of whiskey afterward. Under hypnosis, both men could have embellished their memories with details suggested by the hypnotist or by cultural expectations. Sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations offer another explanation. In the state between wakefulness and sleep, people often experience vivid visions of figures, levitation, and buzzing sounds while being unable to move. If Hickson and Parker nodded off while waiting for fish to bite, they may have experienced a shared episode and interpreted the hallucinations through the lens of the UFO flap. The secret tape, skeptics argue, captures genuine fear but does not prove the source of that fear was external. It may document two men struggling to process a disturbing and unexplained psychological experience. The third counterpoint places the Pascagoula encounter within the broader context of the 1973 UFO wave. During that period, newspapers and television shows were eager to feature stories of mysterious lights and alien visitors. Reports of UFOs skyrocketed, and audiences were primed to accept extraordinary claims. Against this backdrop, Hickson and Parker's story was amplified and repeated, turning them into national figures almost overnight. Skeptics argue that the intensity of media coverage and the hunger for sensational stories propelled the Pascagoula case into folklore regardless of its veracity. Critics also question the role of researchers like Hynek and Harder. While both men had scientific credentials, they were also invested in promoting UFO research and may have been predisposed to accept the story. Local tourism boards later capitalized on the legend, culminating in the installation of a commemorative marker near the river. Skeptics view this as evidence of how communities can embrace and perpetuate myths for economic or cultural reasons. Without physical evidence such as recovered artifacts or corroborating radar data, they remain unconvinced that anything paranormal occurred. These counter-arguments, suggesting hoax, misperception, and media-driven exaggeration, offer mundane explanations for the Pascagoula abduction. They remind us that memory is fallible and that economic and cultural forces can shape how stories are told and remembered. To move beyond polarized beliefs, we must consider theories that integrate elements of both experience and interpretation. The Pascagoula abduction sits at the intersection of belief and skepticism. To bridge these perspectives, theorists have proposed various models to explain the encounter. Here we explore 4 possibilities, each offering a different lens through which to view the events of 11th October 1973. Genuine extraterrestrial experimentation. In this theory, Hickson and Parker were subjects in an experiment conducted by an extraterrestrial civilization. The robotic beings and their floating eye scanner are seen as advanced probes designed to collect biological samples while minimizing risk to their creators. The Oval Craft's silent operation suggests technologies beyond human capability at the time. Supporters argue that the men's descriptions predate many popular depictions of greys and drones, lending credibility to their testimony. Proponents suggest that Earth could be a site of ongoing study by visiting intelligences. The abductees are examined, perhaps to monitor genetic or environmental changes, then returned. The emotionless efficiency reported by Hickson fits this narrative of detached scientific observation. If such visits are widespread, the Pascagoula incident becomes one data point in a much larger program that spans the globe and perhaps millennia. This raises questions about consent and the ethical implications of being studied without knowledge. The broader cosmic perspective also enters here. With billions of potentially habitable planets in our galaxy, the odds of advanced life forms are significant. Travel across interstellar distances might be achieved through probes and autonomous vehicles. From this viewpoint, the Pascagoula event could be interpreted not as a singular anomaly, but as part of a systematic exploration. The lack of direct communication might indicate that the visitors have no interest in human society beyond scientific curiosity. A psychological explanation offers that the men experienced a shared hallucination triggered by fatigue and cultural priming. Sleep researchers describe hypnagogia as a state when the brain is transitioning between wakefulness and sleep. During this state, people may hear buzzing sounds, feel vibrations, and see vivid images. The body can feel paralyzed while the mind dreams. Hickson and Parker had worked long hours, were in a dark and monotonous environment, and may have dozed off. When one awoke and saw lights, perhaps reflections from industrial equipment, his brain filled in the rest. Shared psychosis, or folie à deux, occurs when one person's delusional belief is transmitted to another. Hickson, older and more authoritative, may have verbalized his hallucination, and Calvin, younger and exhausted, internalized it as reality. Their later hypnotic sessions could have reinforced the narrative. The secret tape at the sheriff's office captures genuine fear, but that fear could stem from a psychological event rather than an external encounter. Supporters of this theory note that when similar episodes occur in cultures without a UFO lore, people describe demons or supernatural beings rather than aliens. The content of the hallucination reflects cultural context. The final theory suggests that the Pascagoula event involved a temporary overlap between dimensions. Modern physics entertains the idea of multiple universes and hidden dimensions beyond our perception. Folklore worldwide is rich with stories of people being taken to other realms, fairy hills, underworlds, parallel worlds, and returning with altered perceptions of time and space. The robotic beings could represent entities from a different layer of reality, whose appearance does not conform to our biology. The floating eye might be a device that scans across dimensions. Proponents of this idea note that Hickson later reported receiving telepathic visions of future floods and disasters. These could be interpreted as information glimpsed from a timeline adjacent to ours. The men's paralysis and missing time are consistent with accounts of people caught between worlds, where normal physical laws do not apply. While this theory is speculative and lacks empirical support, it offers a framework that encompasses the stranger aspects of the story and connects it to a broader tradition of anomalous experiences. These theories, extraterrestrial experimentation, psychological event, and cross-dimensional encounter, illustrate how one story can generate a range of interpretations. Each theory invites viewers to consider different possibilities and reflect on their own assumptions about reality. In the final chapter, we step back from the details and contemplate what the Pascagoula abduction tells us about ourselves. Almost half a century after two fishermen ran into a police station claiming they were taken aboard a mysterious craft, the Pascagoula abduction remains unresolved. For some, it stands as convincing evidence of non-human intelligence interacting with ordinary people. For others, it is an example of how stress, culture, and imagination can combine to create compelling narratives. The truth may lie somewhere in between, blending real experiences with human interpretation. What is undeniable is the emotional weight of the story. Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker were visibly shaken. Their voices on the secret tape tremble with fear. Whether they encountered extraterrestrials, cutting-edge technology, a psychological episode, or another realm, their lives were forever changed. The case forces us to confront larger questions about how we make sense of the unknown. Do we default to belief or skepticism? How do stories become legends? And how do legends shape our beliefs? As you reflect on the Pascagoula abduction, consider not only the specifics of this case, but what it reveals about our hunger for mystery. The river still flows past the pier where it happened, carrying with it the murmurs of all who have wondered. The next time you stand in the dark, listening to the sound of water and wind, ask yourself, if something unexplainable appeared before you, how would you make sense of it? Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most intriguing abduction stories ever told. If this episode left you wondering about what's out there, please like, share, and subscribe to Index Unknown. Do you think the Pascagoula encounter was a genuine alien experiment, a secret government operation, a shared hallucination, or something else entirely? Share your theories in the comments and let us know which mysteries you'd like us to explore next.